Imagine a meeting planned to seal the end of a marriage, but instead unravels a plot filled with twists and startling revelations. This is the scenario Sofia Mendonça, a dedicated doctor and single mother, faces as she enters the Olympus restaurant, where a simple piece of paper changes the course of her life. With her young son by her side, Sofia finds herself caught in a web of mysteries that challenge the tranquility she found in the simple village life she retreated to after leaving the hustle and bustle of the city. Away from the spotlight and the rush, Sofia had become accustomed to a calmer existence, but being summoned for a divorce in an environment as opulent as the Olympus restaurant brings back the complexity and chaos she thought she had left behind. Moreover, the meeting with her husband Caio, a businessman with now questionable intentions, offers more than the end of a marriage. It presents a legacy that puts Sofia at the center of a power play and intrigue. As the dinner progresses and her husband fails to appear, the restaurant, with its chandeliers and mirrors, turns into the stage for a drama that intensifies with the discovery of a will hidden among the menus, making Sofia the heir to a fortune she never desired. The evening takes an even more dramatic turn when a cry for help puts her back in her role as a doctor, saving a life in a critical situation, far from the controlled environment of the hospital. With her family's fate hanging by a thread and the past and present colliding in unexpected ways, Sofia faces an emotional and legal whirlwind that tests her in every possible way. Each passing minute, every decision she makes, leads her down paths that question her integrity, her capabilities, and her future. This is just the beginning of The Will, a narrative intertwined with family secrets and legal disputes, where the truth is as precious as the life Sofia fights to protect. Who really was Caio Mendonça, and what do the documents that could forever alter Sofia's future hide? Follow this journey of suspense, emotion, and discoveries, where each chapter reveals another piece of a complex and disturbing puzzle. Upon arriving for a divorce meeting with her wealthy husband, the doctor entered the restaurant with her young son. Upon seeing a piece of wool on the table instead of a menu, Sofia remembered that she had lived in a suburban village with her son, Leonardo, for a few months. During that time, they had grown unaccustomed to the pace of city life and now felt out of place. "Mama, why is it so noisy here? The village is much quieter and there are hardly any cars," Leonardo asked, clutching Sofia's hand firmly. She smiled and replied, "Yes, you adapted quickly. At first, you didn't like the village at all. You saw wolves in every shadow, but now you are not afraid of anything. Our village is very pleasant, much better than the city, and if something happens, the dogs bark so loudly that any beast would run away." Sofia nodded and directed them to the pedestrian crossing to cross to the other side of the street. Right there was the restaurant with a bold yellow sign displaying the name Olympus. The perpetual traffic jams during rush hour, the continuous hum of cars, and the green glow of the neon signs distracted her and made her forget the main reason for her trip to the city. Sofia had taken a day off at the district hospital where she had recently started working as a surgeon. Her husband, Caio, had announced his intention to divorce, although he had previously rejected all contrary proposals from his wife. It was also curious that the businessman had scheduled the meeting directly at the restaurant, which was a big surprise for Sofia. All this fuss for what? We could have discussed everything by phone. And really, what's the point? As if I had something to gain from it, especially after everything that happened between us, Sofia thought sadly. She brought Leonardo with her not by chance, as there was simply no one to leave the child within the village. However, the boy did not object to participating in a small hour-long bus trip with a window seat. What could be better when you're only 9 years old? Upon opening the restaurant door, Sofia let her son enter first, which genuinely surprised him. "Wow, what beauty, Mom, look at the mirrors and the chandeliers." The woman smiled. She had forgotten the last time she simply dined in such establishments. How much time had passed? About years ago, or maybe more, maybe it was the day Caio proposed to her, placing the engagement ring in a champagne glass. Pushing the intrusive romantic memory aside, Sophia held her son's hand and led him to the hall. The host greeted her with a protocol smile that said a lot. He had probably mentally estimated the financial capabilities of the client and thus decided that there was no need to hurry. Nothing special would come of it. A mother with a child was not a rich man with a mistress in his arms, throwing money around like the mythical Midas. "We have a table reserved for Caio Mendonça, but I don't see him anywhere," Sophia asked, feeling perplexed. The manager hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Yes, that's correct, the table is reserved. Mr. Mendonça is a bit late and asked that you order." Sophia shook her head, disappointed. "Well, even here, my husband cannot be punctual. He even arrived late for our own wedding." The manager chose not to comment and simply directed the guests to their table. To Sophia's delight, it was in a quiet and discreet spot near the window. Thanking the manager for his help, they crossed the hall and sat down. The grandeur of the setting left little Leonardo dizzy, while others around them indulged in food and drink, provoking a fierce appetite in the boy. "Mama, let's order something quick. I'm really hungry," his son pleaded. "Of course, dear, we will soon," Sophia responded, picking up the menu. At that moment, a strange piece of paper with a heraldic seal fell onto the table. Still perplexed, Sophia picked it up cautiously and examined it closely. "Mama, what's this?" Leonardo asked, astonished, but Sophia did not hear her son's last question as she was absorbed in reading the document before her. What she read made her uncomfortable. As it turned out later, the will of Caio Mendonça was included in the menu, but the most interesting thing was not that but the fact that the only person listed as the heir to all the property and real estate was Sophia Mendonça herself. She was stunned and breathless with surprise. How was this possible? And what did Alan have to do with this? Why had Caio arranged this meeting? Did he want to humiliate her with this inheritance? Well, if that was the case, he certainly had succeeded. As they waited for the order, Sophia felt a strong inner turmoil because Caio was still not there. He could not manage his time and arrive punctually. And why bother with all this inheritance circus? Without knowing the answers to these questions, Sophia got lost in speculation. Fortunately, she did not have to wait long to be distracted, as the order arrived at that moment, to Leonardo's delight. The boy was very hungry after the trip, but Sophia, even though she did not feel like eating anything after reading the will, her appetite had completely disappeared, and the food on the table now evoked no emotion in her. This could not be said about Leonardo, who avidly enjoyed the delicacies and praised the local cuisine. Having waited for Caio in vain, Sophia decided to call him and find out what was going on. Imagine her surprise when the indifferent voice of the cell phone operator informed her that the subscriber was out of the coverage area. How strange, why would he turn off his phone? Though perhaps he was in a place with no reception, Sophia thought anxiously. A few minutes later, she tried calling Caio again, but the response was the same. Her ex-husband seemed to have vanished into thin air. Sophia decided to wait a little longer and then leave the restaurant, leaving behind the ill-fated inheritance. Essentially, she did not need it. Let Caio decide for himself what to do next. Besides, Sophia had come to resolve the divorce issue, but instead had to deal with her husband's final will, for whom she no longer harbored any feelings. Lost in gloomy thoughts, Sophia looked around the hall, noting its full occupancy. Understandable, it was dinner time for business meetings, romantic encounters, and pleasant family gatherings for some celebration. Suddenly, strange sounds caught her attention from the other side of the establishment. Someone at a nearby table was enthusiastically celebrating a birthday. Initially, Sophia thought the screams were coming from there, but listening more closely, she realized that the birthday person and his company had nothing to do with it. Amidst the chaos of screams and exclamations, she distinctly heard, "Please, someone call an ambulance, help. Is there a doctor here? Please help. Son, I'll be right back. Just don't leave here, okay? Said Sophia. Then, she ran toward the source of the sound, where a crowd had already gathered. Okay, Mom, it's so delicious here that I wouldn't want to leave anyway. Are you going to finish your plate? If you don't want it, I can eat it, her son offered. Sophia smiled. Well, if you want it, go ahead. I definitely won't eat anymore today. Just try not to eat too much or your stomach might hurt, okay? Leonardo nodded and continued his meal. Meanwhile, Sophia approached the crowd, her concern visibly growing. She really did not like such situations where witnesses to an unpleasant event watched everything unfold and commented loudly on what the doctors were doing. As soon as Sophia managed to get through the crowd, she saw a young man lying on the floor, his face turning purple, and he was rapidly losing strength while clutching his throat. All right, folks, step back, I'm a doctor. Did someone finally call an ambulance? There's no time to waste, every minute counts, exclaimed Sophia with a tone that made it sound like she was in an operating room and not a restaurant. Someone grumbled, dissatisfied, questioning her qualifications, but most still dispersed. For his part, the manager did not argue with her and quickly dialed the emergency number. Sophia, on the other hand, acted skillfully, like a true professional. She unbuttoned the man's shirt, removed his tie, and began to examine him. This was the first time she had encountered something like this. Sophia guessed that the man was probably experiencing throat swelling, which threatened to turn into fatal suffocation. She did not know what had caused this reaction, but she understood that action was necessary immediately. Catching the manager's gaze, she quickly ordered, "Please bring clean napkins, water, and a knife, and get all these people out of here. There's nothing to see or comment on. After all, there are children here." The manager hesitated, then, looking at the guest, asked, "Do you really know what to do?" Sophia snorted, irritated, "Of course I know. In fact, young man, I am a surgeon with a lot of practice. I used to work at the city hospital and was about to take over as head. So, hurry up. Bring everything I asked for or this man will hardly survive until the ambulance arrives." The manager ran to the kitchen to fetch everything needed. The young manager immediately realized that if someone died during his shift at the restaurant, the owner would certainly fire him, blaming him for allowing such an incident. The manager was not sure exactly what had happened to the guest, however, he did not doubt his products and prepared dishes at all. Seeing a bottle of strong alcohol on one of the tables, Sophia grabbed it and quickly treated the rapidly swelling man's throat. Then, when the manager brought everything that was needed, she performed the same manipulation with the knife and began to work to avoid shocking the visitors. The manager brought a clean tablecloth and covered Sophia with it while she bent over the man who was fainting. In a way, it was like a screen behind which a doctor performed what was almost the first tracheotomy in her practice. Truth be told, Sophia had never had to work in such difficult conditions before. After all, there was no operating room nurse to help her, who would hand her a clip or change the scalpel. Sophia knew there were only a few minutes until the ambulance arrived, but that time could be decisive in this young man's life. It was also surprising that his companions had disappeared somewhere. Either they had panicked and fled, or they were in the crowd of spectators that the manager had pushed a few meters away. Taking the knife in her hands, she made a precise and calculated incision. Contrary to expectations, nothing special happened, which left her extremely shocked. Could the man have suffocated? Suddenly, her hands trembled, and sweat sprouted on her forehead. The last thing she expected was for him to die here, in the restaurant, of all places, echoed in her mind. This was the last thing Sophia expected, by all means. The incision should have provided vital oxygen, allowing normal breathing. Of course, the notion was conditional, since what he was experiencing could not be called proper breathing. But, on the other hand, it was better than losing consciousness from suffocation. Checking his pulse, Sophia paled. No, this simply could not be. His pulse was barely detectable under her fingers. Trying not to focus on the worst, she composed herself and began resuscitation efforts. As a doctor, she considered that the man could have suffered a cardiac arrest due to suffocation, and now, to bring him back to life, she needed not only to ensure oxygen access but also to perform chest compressions. Despair froze in Sophia's eyes. She had never encountered such a complex case before. Normally, the patients who arrived at her operating table were already adapted and prepared, but here, in such extreme conditions, making decisions was doubly, perhaps even triply, difficult. However, Sophia had no other choice. Without losing hope, she began resuscitation. Of course, considering the incision in the throat, she acted with extreme caution and applied minimal pressure on the chest. Still, the stranger lying on the floor remained unconscious and showed no signs of life. Tears streamed from Sophia's eyes, leaving burning salty trails on her flushed cheeks. "Come on, please, dear, just don't die," Sophia exclaimed in despair, trying to revive the man again, and at that moment, when she had mentally resigned herself to his departure, the patient suddenly let out a deep moan, then jolted his whole body. Sophia, startled, realized that at that moment she had won this battle not for life, but against death. Of course, she had done this before, but never in a crowded restaurant, alone, with inadequate instruments for surgical procedures. Ironically, just as the man began to breathe again, the doctors from the resuscitation team and some paramedics entered the room. Assessing the situation, they immediately transferred the patient to a stretcher. Sophia pulled the doctor aside and explained the actions she had taken. The doctor listened respectfully and nodded. "Yes, you did everything right. It seems he had an allergic reaction that probably caused the cardiac arrest, and for that same reason, despite making the incision, you did not achieve the desired result. In the end, resuscitation was still necessary." Sophia nodded and forced a tired smile. "Yes, I think I've never been so anxious in my life as today. It's like facing the first exam during medical school, and even then, it didn't bring me to tears." "Oh well, it's a pity you're no longer working at the city clinic, but still, thank you very much. Now this man will need rehabilitation, and we also need to do some tests to understand what triggered the episode." Sophia immediately expressed her solidarity with the paramedic, and after watching him leave, turned her eyes back to her table, but Leonardo was no longer there. Sophia looked around anxiously, and almost immediately spotted him standing among the involuntary spectators of what had happened. A sweet smile played on her son's lips as he saw how resolute and strong his mother could be. Naturally, because of the screen held by the manager, Leonardo could not see anything, but judging by the reaction of the adults around, he understood that today his mother had performed a truly heroic act. Confirmation of this came in the form of loud applause from the restaurant guests. Sophia felt embarrassed. Then, she discreetly signaled to the waitress and asked for the bill. It turns out that Kaio never showed up at the restaurant. Moreover, he hadn't even bothered to prepay the table and the order made by his ex-wife for their son. To Sophia's surprise, the prices at the restaurant were quite high, and she simply did not have enough money to cover the bill, and she had ordered only a modest dinner. It was then that she really felt embarrassed. What would she say to the waitress now that she couldn't even pay for that modest dinner? Looking embarrassed at the girl in an apron with the restaurant's logo, Sophia took a deep breath to explain her problem when the manager approached her, touching Sophia's hand confidentially. "No, it's not necessary. I've already paid your bill out of my own pocket. Consider it a gift from our establishment. If it weren't for you, it seems that a tragedy would have been inevitable." Sophia smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Initially, this manager had seemed to her an arrogant snob, who was accustomed to dividing people into good and bad. How first impressions can be misleading. "Thank you very much, we are very grateful to you," said Sophia reservedly. Then, she took Leonardo's hand and headed for the exit. Wait, you forgot your documents. Your husband asked me to give them to you. He insisted personally on this and gave his word of honor that he would do as he asked, said the manager, as a final thought. Sophia turned around and saw that he was holding Kaio's will. Clenching her teeth, Sophia still took it and put it in her bag. At first, she wanted to demonstratively throw the document in the trash, but, deciding not to betray the kind manager, she refrained from doing so. At that moment, Sophia was more concerned with the reaction of the body of the saved man to the manipulation she had performed. From experience, she knew that ahead of him could be a battle for his own life, as it was still unclear what exactly caused the swelling or triggered an allergic reaction. "Mom, maybe I'll be a doctor too," said Leonardo at the bus stop. Sophia smiled. "No, son, you don't need that. I don't think medicine is your calling. You're good at drawing and have a decent voice. The kindergarten teachers said you could be a good singer." Leonardo coughed nervously. Mom, it's just for fun." Sophia frowned. "Well, first grow up a bit, then we'll see whether you'll be a doctor or not." "All right, let's go, our bus just arrived." After paying the fare, they walked habitually to the back of the bus and sat by the window. Sophia knew her son liked to watch the road, the yellow fields, and the occasional stretches of forest. She herself usually began to feel drowsy, as the passing landscape outside acted as a good sedative for her. After the incident at the restaurant with the rescue, she temporarily forgot about Kaio's mischief in leaving his will for his ex-wife for some inexplicable reason. She only remembered it at home when she began rummaging through her bag, since she had to work the next day and take on the shift. Sophia was also anticipating the night shift, as she had taken an unplanned day off to meet with Kaio. Actually, Sophia did not like night shifts. After all, she had no one to leave Leonardo with, although most villagers believed that 9 years was a conscious age for a child, meaning that he could take care of himself quite well. Sophia disagreed and always took Leonardo to work, letting him sleep in the nurse's room. The head of the department understood this, knowing the circumstances of the young mother. If it weren't for Kaio's betrayal, Sophia would never have left her established position and continued to work at the city clinic. After all, she was considered one of the best employees. There were rumors that the chief surgeon had recommended her for his position when he was promoted. Unfortunately, as often happens, everything collapsed in a single moment when Kaio called his wife from a business trip, and once again, for some reason, the young businessman forgot to turn off the video call. Deep down, Sophia immediately saw a long-legged girl in a short hobby, the type usually provided in hotel rooms. The blonde with dyed hair and full, juicy cherry-colored lips looked at the screen with childlike innocence, thinking Sophia could not see her. The irony of the situation was that Kaio simply forgot to turn off the camera on his smartphone and thought he was making the call with his security. At first, Sophia thought it was a joke and that her husband had decided to enter into the joke in an unusual way. Putting on a serious expression, she even tried to follow along, pretending not to see what was happening in the background. But when the stranger blatantly kissed Kaio's neck, Sophia realized that all this was actually happening, here and now. It was then that she triggered a real online confrontation with Kaio. If her husband had been there at that moment, she would undoubtedly have slapped him in the face as a lasting reminder, as a mark of a traitor. But the worst was yet to come for her when Sophia discovered that Kaio's mistress, Simone, was raising a 3-year-old son, born from the affair with her husband. The news deeply struck her pride, reminding the unhappy woman of her own infertility. The situation was complicated by the fact that Leonardo, the wife's son, was adopted from an orphanage at 2 months old. It happened that Leonardo's mother had died during the complicated birth by cesarean section. The situation was further exacerbated by the fact that it was Sophia who had to perform the operation when the patient was admitted to the operating room in critical condition. Subsequently, it was discovered that Leonardo's mother had not undergone medical follow-up throughout the pregnancy and had spent the entire period of pregnancy in a cabin on the outskirts of the city. By a strange twist of fate, this woman became the first patient to die on Sophia's operating table, taking with her Leonardo's brother. Needless to say, this incident was a devastating blow for Sophia. She cried hysterically, unable to recompose herself. Before this, her reputation in the surgery department was considered impeccable, but here, circumstances turned against her. Dr. Umberto, the head of the department, tried to console her, repeating, "Don't take it to heart, Sophia. Sooner or later, it had to happen. You know, every surgeon has such cases. Some happen at the beginning of their career, some in the middle, and some just before retirement. But I should have saved her, Dr. Umberto. It was my duty as a doctor, as a woman, as a human being. How could this happen? And what's going to happen to the baby now?" Sophia sobbed, struggling to speak through the tears. The head just shook his head and left the office. The sight of his subordinate crying brought unpleasant associations to him, as he always believed that a surgeon should be strong and composed, but in this tragic situation, even he felt like crying uncontrollably. The woman who died on the operating table had twins, but it was impossible to save both boys. Sophia made every effort to bring little Leonardo back to life. The cause was a pathology that no one knew about. If the deceased had undergone all prenatal care, probably all this would have been clarified much earlier. Something could have been done, and the doctors during childbirth would have known what they were dealing with. But things happened the way they happened, leaving a deep and unhealed wound in Sophia's heart. For about a month, she couldn't sleep properly, waking up at night from nightmares and breaking into silent sobs. Caio took all this calmly, as if he did not understand what his wife had gone through. Largely, he always considered himself a practical person who could control his emotions and was not afraid of anything or anyone, but Sophia suffered an internal rupture. Although the medical commission found no violations during the operation, Sophia followed the instructions in everything she did. Finding a fault in her actions was impossible, but she had already judged herself guilty. She knew that if she had tried harder, she would definitely have saved the mother and her two babies. In fact, Sophia was mistaken. But who among us has never been mistaken due to our own reasoning and decisions? Only after torturing herself with doubts did she initiate an extremely unpleasant conversation with Caio. "Listen, what if we adopted that boy? You know, the one who survived the operation? I already consider myself his godmother, you know. His brother died, his mother too, and now he's facing the orphanage. We've wanted a child for so long, but it just never worked out. I don't blame you, probably it's my female problems, work is to blame, there's never time for checkups." Caio frowned disapprovingly. "Adopt someone else's child? Why would we do that? Just imagine, Sophia, what if I died on the operating table? Would you adopt or take in all my relatives? That's absurd. Following your logic, if a woman's operation goes wrong, you're obligated to marry her husband out of solidarity. It's ridiculous, really." Sophia bit her lip painfully. "What does that have to do with it, Caio? You know perfectly well what happened. Every time I see that boy my heart bleeds. I want to take him in. Do you understand? I feel like he's become family to me. I held him in my arms, personally assessed him on the Apgar scale, you know." Caio shook his head negatively. "No, Sophia, I don't understand. I feel like I've stopped understanding you a long time ago. You've completely lost your mind with your work. Not only have you been hysterical for an entire month, but now you want to adopt a random child. Tell me, have you bothered to find out who his parents are? Maybe he's from the streets, and his father, a drunk. A convict, I'm sure." Sophia didn't bother to respond to her husband's sarcasm. She simply went to another room, closing the door behind her. Deep down, she had already made her decision. She knew she would adopt Leonardo, no matter what. In the end, Kyle would have to accept it as it was. After all, it didn't change much in his life, since he spent most of his time on business trips and trips anyway, so he wasn't particularly concerned about what Sophia would be dealing with. The main thing was that the boy didn't wake him up in the middle of the night with his loud and piercing screams. As if it were a reward, little Leonardo behaved quietly and cried very rarely. Even when his teeth were coming in, he just grumbled quietly, frowning in discontent, letting his mother know that he was uncomfortable. In those moments, Sophia wanted to take away his pain, hold him close, and become one with him. Then, even though she couldn't give birth now, she had a beloved son, to whom she had given life. Of course, Leonardo knew nothing about adoption, and even if he knew, he had no one closer than Sophia, so the boy didn't immediately understand why his father never gave him presents and generally behaved in a cold and silent manner towards him. Moreover, Caio did not like talking to Leonardo and refused to play in the playground with him. Initially, this upset the child a lot, especially considering that many of his peers were picked up from daycare by their parents. He only had his mother, who took care of him, took him to daycare, played with him, and read bedtime stories, filling her beloved son with affection. During the time spent in the village, after the move, Sophia reconsidered her views on life, realizing that perhaps Leonardo was the reason for the divorce. However, she would not have acted differently in any case, because if she had accepted her husband's offer, she would have blamed herself for the rest of her days. Of course, little Leonardo had no idea why his mother occasionally went to the city cemetery, always bringing a bouquet of yellow tulips. For some inexplicable reason to her, Sophia believed that the deceased mother of the boy loved these flowers. Perhaps this was explained by the fact that, on the day of admission to the hospital, the young mother wore a simple yellow dress with white polka dots, which made her look like a big daisy from afar. The name of the deceased was Mary, but her name meant nothing to Sophia, as they had never crossed paths in life and had only seen each other in the operating room, by chance. That day, there was no surgeon in the maternity ward who was either sick or on vacation, and Sophia was called to perform the surgery. No, she did not refuse, and she had performed such procedures several times before, but this time everything went completely wrong. Sophia never considered Leonardo a stranger. In her perception, the boy was hers and the closest person in the world to her, and the fact that Caio left her for some long-legged girl who got pregnant by him didn't matter anymore. The only thing Sophia blamed Caio for was his actions that contributed to her rapid departure to the village. It turns out that, immediately after the separation, her ex-husband began spreading rumors about her as a woman without imagination and charm. The businessman also deliberately fabricated falsehoods to discredit the doctor in the eyes of colleagues and acquaintances. Thus, the rumors slowly spread through the department. Behind Sophia's back, there were constantly mocking and disparaging comments whispered. Of course, not all colleagues were against Sophia, some even sympathized with her. Most, however, simply saw this as an opportunity to mock one of the best specialists in the department, whom they envied with black envy. Among others, Sophia's colleague, Lara, stood by her, always supporting her and considering her an example of a perfect surgeon. Once, they entered medical school together, studied in the same group, and lived in the dormitory, barely managing to pass to the next scholarship. It was thanks to Sophia that Lara managed to pass all the exams and obtain a diploma. The truth is that, in the theoretical part, Lara did not feel very confident and often failed one exam after another. Noticing her friend's weaknesses, Sophia began to help her, taking the risk, bombarding her with theoretical questions in her free time from studies. In the end, it paid off, allowing Lara to realize her childhood dream of becoming a surgeon. It was Lara who advised Sophia to leave the city as quickly as possible, erase any memory of herself for a while, and come back later when everything would be forgotten. Trust me, Sophia, human memory is very short, all this will pass, her friend always said whenever they met. At first, Sophia sincerely doubted, fearing that she would not be able to find a suitable job in the province, but, as it turned out later, her fears were unfounded. She was warmly welcomed at the district clinic. Overall, Sophia's work changed little. Essentially, she still performed surgeries, assisted, or simply did night shifts, covering for her colleagues. Fortunately, she had enough money to buy a small house in the village. It was a small amount that Sophia had saved, setting aside a part of her salary for several years. She saved up to buy her own car, used, of course, but still, her own personal car. Previously, Sophia always had to ask Caio to take her to work or to help her elderly parents who lived on the outskirts of the city, but Caio, as it is known, was constantly busy and very rarely made concessions, citing high workloads in business and other factors that turned out to be pure lies and excuses. Oh, memories, memories. How they can be painful at times. After putting Leonardo to bed early, Sophia sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and pondered what she should do with the drafted will. Tear it into small pieces? Burn it? No, it's official. In the end, unable to find an answer to her question, Sophia kept the blank paper in the cupboard for the time being. She picked up a simple women's novel from the shelf, one of those that are easy and quick to read. Unwittingly, she fell asleep in the chair, where she slept until morning. The weather outside promised to be good. After preparing a hearty breakfast for Leonardo, Sophia began to get ready. Today would be a busy day, and besides everything else, she wanted to take her son with her so that he could be cared for during her shift. Fortunately, there was a playground in the hospital courtyard, which was a real blessing for the employees with children, but as soon as Sophia crossed the threshold of the ward, the duty nurse immediately presented her with an extremely unpleasant surprise in the form of a policeman who was investigating a case of attempted murder. "Good morning, what does this have to do with me?" Sophia asked, surprised. The policeman hesitated for a moment, clearly assessing the initial reaction of the doctor. "My name is Ricardo Pereira. I'm a senior investigator at the district police department. It turns out that your spouse did not return home after a meeting at the restaurant. Moreover, his car was found in an alley a few hundred meters from the restaurant. Blood was found inside the car, along with signs of a struggle, indicating that an attack occurred. Probably. I don't understand something here. How is this related to me?" Sophia exclaimed. "I didn't do anything, you can ask anyone. I went to the restaurant, yes, but my husband never showed up." The policeman shook his head. "Yes, I know that, Mrs. Mendonça, we've already interrogated witnesses, and the fact that your husband didn't show up for the meeting doesn't explain his disappearance at all. You don't deny knowing that Caio Mendonça made a will before his death, in your favor. Can you explain that?" Sophia shrugged. "I didn't know anything about that will. Caio left me a blank paper in the restaurant menu. The manager can confirm that." The expression on the policeman's face showed disbelief. He mentally marked her as a suspect. "You know what? Don't go too far from home for now, okay? Because your husband's death benefits only you, due to the will he left. According to it, you inherit all of Caio Mendonça's property, including the business and other financial assets. Is that true, Mrs. Mendonça?" She nodded, resigned. "Yes, that's true. But why are you talking about murder? The body hasn't been found yet, as far as I understand." The policeman smiled. "Well, that's just a matter of time. If there's blood and signs of a struggle in the car, then there's a chance that your husband was the victim of an attempted murder, and it seems that it was successful." "Ex-husband," corrected Sophia, quite brusquely. The policeman pursed his lips, skeptical. "Absolutely correct, although that's no longer my concern. Ex-husband, current husband. At the moment, you are the main suspect in this case, and a complaint has been filed against you by Simone, yes, the same partner of your spouse who gave birth to his child. Don't tell me you didn't know about that." "I knew, I caught them red-handed. My husband had been cheating on me for years and had a child out of wedlock with another woman. Sophia couldn't help but confess. The policeman narrowed his eyes at her. It was evident that he was conducting the interrogation in an intentionally confrontational manner, hoping that the suspect would make a mistake and lose her composure. Sophia, however, did not consider herself guilty. In fact, she was convinced that her husband's mistress was plotting something nefarious. Unfortunately, before coming to the clinic, Ricardo Pereira had a conversation with Sophia's boss, which only made things worse for her. Now, everyone in the department looked at her as if she were a criminal, waiting for the moment when a patrol would be sent to arrest her. But Sophia herself did not know what to do next. Going over yesterday's events in her mind, she desperately tried to find a way out of the situation, chiding herself for agreeing to meet at the restaurant where Caio or his cunning mistress had set up a very ingenious trap for her. To Sophia's surprise, her visits that day were not even close to being over. Soon, the head of the department summoned her again to introduce her personally to the elderly businessman Eduardo Moreira. "Oh my God, who is this now?" thought Sophia, but of course, she didn't express her thoughts out loud. Unlike the senior investigator from the police department, the businessman turned out to be a pleasant man in his years and did not come to the clinic to criticize Sophia or accuse her of anything. Politely extending his hand to her, Mr. Moreira introduced himself and said, "Thank you for saving my son yesterday. If it weren't for you, he would have died in that restaurant in front of dozens of people." At first, Sophia did not know what he was talking about, but then she remembered. Yes, indeed, she had saved the man yesterday, performing a tracheotomy and direct heart massage. You see, my son Fabio was almost the victim of swindlers and competitors. They wanted to lure him to the restaurant and put poison in his glass, which causes suffocation and cardiac failure. They knew that Fabio had suffered from asthma since childhood, so they hoped to present it as such a pretext. My son was a thorn in the side for many. He is like a lawyer sent by God for me. He won court cases that others could not even dream of winning, so they decided to settle scores with him. Hearing the only good thing of the entire day, Sophia sighed with relief. No need to mention, it's my duty. I simply could not have done otherwise. As soon as I saw what was happening, something clicked in my mind and I acted immediately. In fact, I was not sure of success, but I took the risk anyway, because there was no other choice. Mr. Moreira smiled. Ah, if everyone were as decisive as you, perhaps there would be noticeably fewer problems. And also, if you have time, could you visit my son? He is currently in the city hospital where you used to work. The doctors say he will be released soon. So, if you find a free moment, could you stop by there? Sophia felt uncertain, realizing that she probably would not be able to fulfill the request, as she had enough problems to start making new friends. Listen, Sophia, are you facing any difficulties? You seem so absent, the businessman asked cautiously. She shook her head. No, Mr. Moreira, everything is fine. It's just the fatigue from the night shift hitting me, so don't take it to heart. The businessman nodded sympathetically, then winked at Leonardo, who was a bit away, and headed for the exit. Sophia watched the guest leave, silently thanking him for not judging her for yesterday's actions. Unfortunately, Sophia had no idea what fate had prepared for her as a sweet surprise today. Another thorn in her side was a call from Caio's mistress Simone, who started the conversation accusing Sophia of being responsible for her partner's disappearance. Listen, Simone, I don't know what you've concocted, but I haven't seen Caio for about months. He himself called yesterday, scheduled a meeting, and even put the will on the table, supposedly for me to review, explained Sophia, barely controlling her agitation. Convincing Simone proved to be quite difficult. Without measuring her words, she launched a barrage of insults at Sophia and then threatened her with criminal prosecution and imminent legal action. Well, we'll see about that. First find Caio yourself and then blame me. "You've already taken justice into your own hands and acted arbitrarily here," exclaimed Sophia, frustrated, before ending the call. To be honest, she was completely fed up with all of this. Her hands trembled with nervousness, and beads of sweat formed on her forehead. How was she supposed to perform today's operation in this state? Maybe she should simply take a pen and write her resignation. The last thing she needed was to be accused of medical negligence in her new position. "All right, let's see how it goes. The main thing is that fate doesn't bring any more surprises," Sophia whispered to herself. Fortunately, the workday and the following night passed without incident. Throughout the night, little Leonardo slept peacefully in the nurse's room, while his mother made her rounds, checking the conditions of the patients. Technically, she could have avoided doing this, like most doctors in her position, and rested during the night. Maybe Sophia would have done exactly that, but she simply could not sleep that night. The idea that she was being accused of a crime she did not commit still tormented her mind, not to mention that Simone clearly had some cunning scheme in mind, but exactly what it was, Sophia could not imagine. Days passed unnoticed, during which Sophia had to visit the police station twice and give the same statements. In essence, there was no point in arresting her, since she was actively cooperating in the investigation and had no intention of fleeing, especially considering that she was raising her young son alone. Despite the obvious lack of logic in the crime, the police still did not rule out the possibility that Caio's ex-wife might have been involved in the attempted murder. It's hard to say how this complicated story would have ended if, one day, a tall young man with a distinctive bandage around his throat had not appeared at Sophia's door. At first, Sophia did not recognize the guest she had once saved in a restaurant, but looking closer, she saw the snow-white bandage on his neck, smiled recognizably, and invited him in. Fabio Moreira, once examined, turned out to be a pleasant man who did not come empty-handed. He brought gifts for little Leonardo and a box of expensive chocolates for Sophia. Due to the tracheal surgery, he still had difficulty speaking loudly, communicating almost in a whisper. At first, Sophia responded evasively, feeling uncomfortable with the presence of this stranger, but then, putting all that aside, she told him everything as it was. It happened so quickly and unexpectedly for her that Sophia could not hold back. Perhaps this is what happens when a person is so eager to vent that they are willing to open their heart to the first person they encounter. Fabio listened silently to the savior, not only because his throat hurt and the wound on his neck was healing, but also because he was genuinely interested in the words about the disappearance of Sophia's husband, but leaving a not-so-bad inheritance for his loved ones. "Can I see the will?" asked the lawyer in a low voice, trying not to offend Sophia with embarrassing words. She nodded in agreement and immediately took the document with the official seal from the cabinet. Of course, due to his profession, Fabio had seen such documents many times before and immediately noticed inconsistencies and other nuances, the same ones that meant nothing to an ordinary person. But the most interesting thing was that Fabio knew the notary who had helped Caio draw up that will. Unpleasant rumors circulated about that slippery lawyer, as a few years ago, he had already been a suspect in a criminal case involving fraud and illegal real estate transactions. At that time, João Marcelo managed to escape, coming out with just a light scare, but, as is known, whoever once violated the law and escaped unpunished will certainly repeat the offense and continue until they face court as a defendant. "Right, Sophia, I can't promise anything, but I'll try to gather information about your husband's company, and also be careful what you say. Don't tell anything unnecessary to strangers, it could harm both you and the child." "What does my son have to do with this?" "He's mine, he's innocent," exclaimed Sophia. Fabio added, understandably, "I'm sorry for being a bit direct, but if you are convicted, Leonardo will end up in a children's home, and that's not the nicest place, believe me." Sophia looked gratefully at her guest, mentally admiring how fate had united her with such a kind and understanding person. A week passed quickly, during which Sophia's reputation as a criminal became even more entrenched. Many colleagues, no longer hiding their suspicions, called her a convict and even bet on when she would appear in court. However, essentially, there was not a drop of solid evidence against Sophia. And so what if Caio made a will? Does that mean that Sophia simply got rid of him? Where is the body, or Caio himself, then? And how could she have done it while she was at the restaurant with her son and even saved a lawyer with a dozen witnesses to that? Meanwhile, Fabio Moreira did not waste time and conducted his own independent investigation. For this, he had a network of informants that he hired directly from the streets, paying them so that homeless individuals and orphans were willing to cooperate with him again. It was then revealed that Caio Mendonça, sought by everyone, had been involved in a series of failed business ventures just before formalizing his strange will, which pushed his company to the brink of bankruptcy. Few knew that Caio ran his business not alone, but under the patronage of a more influential businessman who essentially invested his own funds and efforts in the young entrepreneur. But after tens of millions disappeared from the company's accounts, the influential creditor realized that something needed to be done. Regarding Caio, Sophia's cunning husband, he reacted almost instantly and quickly drew up a will in her favor, doing Sophia a great favor by handing her the personal use of the company that now lacked such large sums. According to Caio's plan, Sophia was supposed to pay off this debt out of her own pocket, so that, ideally, he would not take responsibility for it. For this purpose, Caio faked his own death, incriminating his unsuspecting ex-wife. Fabio learned all this from his informants who had been watching the house of the businessman's missing mistress, Simone, all this time. One day, Fabio's homeless agents noticed a long-haired beggar with a cane entering the woman's house and spending the night there. At first, Fabio didn't understand what was going on, but when he thought about it, he guessed where the problem was. The young lawyer waited about days, then, with the help of his assistants, organized a small ambush near Simone's house. They didn't have to wait long. Fabio smiled, then approached him and quickly pulled off his wig. The lawyer's intuition did not disappoint him this time. Under the layer of makeup and a curly wig was none other than Caio, who was planning to soon become another person, changing his surname, name, and passport. "Oh, what a mishap, it looks like you lost your wig, or is it not yours?" Fabio commented ironically, deliberately trying to provoke Caio. The disguised businessman looked furiously at the lawyer. "So, it's all right then. Enjoy your victory, but you won't be able to prove anything. I did nothing wrong." Fabio raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Well, it's all a matter of perspective, Mr. Mendonça. Whether you did or didn't, you wanted to put all the moral sins on your wife, didn't you? And you also intended to burden her with a debt that she wouldn't be able to pay off in her lifetime. I wonder what your creditor and benefactor will say when they find out you're alive." Hearing about his influential co-founder, Caio paled and shook his head negatively. "No, there's no need to inform anyone. I'd rather go to the police station and give my testimony. Just make sure they put me in a separate cell with guards nearby. I'll tell everything, just don't tell anyone, please." Fabio pursed his lips meaningfully, then dialed the number of the nearest police station. On that same day, Caio was arrested. The businessman willingly gave his testimony, knowing that if his creditor discovered he was alive, he would face some unpleasant moments in life, if he still had a life. The next morning, Sophia was called to the police station again, but not to be accused of something illegal, but to receive sincere and heartfelt apologies. Tears shone in Sophia's eyes, because until yesterday, everyone considered her a criminal, expecting her to go to trial, and now everything had changed, turned upside down, as if by a magic wand. Without Fabio's intervention, there would hardly have been significant changes in Sophia's case, and she herself would not have been able to clear her good name for the rest of her days. Stepping out of the police station as a free person, Sophia smiled and looked up at the sky, where the gentle sun immediately touched her with its yellow hands, like a caring mother caressing the cheeks of her beloved child. Sophia was greeted by Fabio and little Leonardo, who had grown quite attached to the lawyer during this time, considering him a smart and kind person. Deciding to celebrate the dismissal of the charges against Sophia, the trio headed to the nearest cafe to indulge in ice cream and talk about everything under the sun. Sophia's face was radiant with happiness, music played in her soul, and birds sang. Looking at Fabio, she couldn't help but think that the whole situation reminded her of a fairy tale, where the main character had to face many challenges that, ultimately, brought her real and tangible happiness, like now, when Fabio looked at her with loving eyes, counting the seconds until he would offer her an engagement ring in a velvet box and ask for her hand in marriage. And so, what did you think of the story? Don't forget to comment, like, and share the channel. See you next time.